So it's going to be,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I now call the Springfield Budget Committee meeting to order. Your Nathan Bell.
Oh.
Good evening. I'm Nathan Bell, the city's finance director. Similar to last year, before we kick off the formal FY27 proposed budget process, I wanted to do a Oregon budget training. We have 4 new members joining us this year. Committee members Elliot Harwell and Micah Weiss, and then 2 new counselors, Counselor Jill Quadros and Counselor Andrew Buck. So excited to have them all. Tonight's training is going to be on the process over 3 evenings, Oregon budget law and the role of the budget committee. I want this to be a conversation, so if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Just for ease of facilitation, I'll facilitate this portion of the evening. Okay, use of technology. If you're joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak during business from the audience, please use the raise the hand option at the bottom of your screen to be called upon to provide comment when the designated time is announced. Public comment submitted by email and mail will be shared with the budget committee. It's being recorded this evening. I want to mention to folks that the microphones are sensitive. If people talk on the side, a lot of times the mics will pick that up, and if multiple people are talking, we can end up with kind of a garbled audio. So I'm going to ask that people try to limit their conversations to the extent of and then also this evening, we've set aside a full hour at the end of the evening for public comment. The voting mechanics. Voice vote, all in favor say aye, all opposed say no when deciding on motions. In the case of any no votes, the chair will need to ask for a roll call vote in order to identify the vote count and vote ownership for the record. When we get to the election of officers, if it's a single nominee, it's going to be a vote the way I just described. If it's multiple nominees, we're going to do a roll call vote and ask that each voting member indicate the name of the nominee they wish to cast a vote in favor of. And then department directors are going to be available all 3 evenings. Tonight, they're going to come up for brief presentations. We're going to not have questions for them this evening. We have a very packed schedule, but they're going to be available tomorrow evening. We've set aside 2 full hours for questions. And when we do get to that point tomorrow evening, when we bring them up, one of the things we're going to ask is that if you have questions for that department, let's have everybody ask those questions of that director. That way we're not bringing them up and down. We can make the process move a little more efficiently. All right, our evening agendas. Starting with this evening, after this budget training, we're going to convene the FY27 budget process. That's going to start with our returning Vice Chair, Michael Roman, opening the meeting, asking for a roll call from the staff. And then we'll move into the election of officers. Once the chair is elected, we immediately pass the gavel, and that chair will then run the meeting from that point forward. After that, they'll introduce City Manager Nancy Newton for delivery of the budget message, introduce myself for the budget overview, and then we'll take a brief 10-minute intermission. And then after that, we're going to bring each of the department directors up for just a quick kind of department overview. And following that will be the business from the audience portion of the evening, and that will convene evening one. Tomorrow evening, we're gonna actually kick off with the CETA budget process. It's essentially the same as the city budget process, but scaled down into a single evening. After that, we'll have a brief intermission and then convene evening two with roll call from staff. And then we've got 2 full hours set aside for budget deliberation. This is the opportunity to ask any questions and have any discussions regarding the FY 27 proposed budget. That'll conclude evening 2. And then Wednesday, May 6th is the final evening. Again, we'll convene with the roll call. Jessica Mummy, Deputy Finance Director, will do a state shared revenue presentation. We'll have a public hearing on state shared revenue. And I just want to mention with the public hearings, for the state shared revenue and for CETA, we'll also have a public hearing. That testimony is limited to those specific items. So on the CETA evening, it's limited to the CETA budget. On the state shared revenue, it'll be limited to state shared revenue. After that, we'll have another 30 minutes for budget deliberation. And then I will bring up Rada and entertain any motions for the budget. After that, we'll have one last opportunity to have a discussion on the fiscal year 27 budget, and then we'll move to motions. Those are in the back of your packet. And with that will move this along to our council for adoption in June and begin our FY 27 budget process. All right, Oregon budget law. Oregon budget law essentially does 3 important things. It establishes standard procedures for preparing, presenting, and administering the budget. It requires citizen involvement in the preparation of the budget and public disclosure of the budget before its formal adoption. And it controls the expenditure of public funds. And over the coming slides, I'm going to talk to each of these items. Starting with the budget process, that kicks off in October, and it usually begins with the 5-year forecast presented to the council and a discussion on just the issues that are impacting the coming budgets. Our budget team begins to meet weekly. Our budget team is made up of myself, Deputy Finance Director Jessica Mummy, City Manager Nancy Newton, Assistant City Manager Neil Ladati, and HR Director Shane Hertz. We open our budgeting software in early December, and it stays open, and we do our data entry all the way through the end of January when we close it and start preparing the document. The budget team will meet with all the departments and talk about their budgets and kind of what's going on and any potential changes that are happening. And all of that culminates in a balanced proposed budget that comes to all of you. So the whole process lasts about 6 months with a lot of work and a lot of individuals making contributions. Let's see, second item, budget committee meets over 3 evenings. We're doing that right now. The budget committee approves and recommends a budget. The budget summary and notice of budget hearing are published, and a budget hearing is held. This is going to be held on June 15th in a regular council session. The budget's adopted, appropriations made, and a tax levy declared. And then the last step is we file with the county and the levy is certified. Oregon budget law. This is the second of those 3 important things, and that is citizen involvement. Oregon budget law requires that a budget committee be formed and a process conducted to approve the budget. The budget committee is the city's fiscal planning and advisory committee. The committee consists of city councilors and an equal number of citizens at large. Citizen members are appointed by city council. They serve 3-year terms. The terms are staggered to turn over by 1/3 each year, and they can serve 2 consecutive terms before being required to sit out a year. The budget committee's main role meets publicly to deliberate on the proposed budget, provides an opportunity for the general public to comment on the proposed budget, may make adjustments to the proposed budget, approves and recommends a balanced budget to the city council for adoption. And this is something I want to stress. This is a recommending body, not a decision-making body. They recommend tax levies and debt service amounts, hold a public hearing and make a recommendation to city council on the use of state shared revenue, and communicate to the members of the community about the budget process. And this kind of comes to, I think, the core of your role. Through this process, You get an opportunity to look under the hood, see all the services and the costs associated with them. And our hope is then that you share what you learn, and we see you as ambassadors to the city's budget. What the budget committee is not authorized to do. You cannot change salaries. You cannot negotiate contracts. You cannot change council priorities or policies, and you cannot change the law. Rules regarding budget committee meetings, they're open to the public. Quorum is required to approve any motion, and that is 1/2 of total number of members, not members present. So for this committee, it's 12 members. A quorum is going to be 7 individuals. If no quorum exists, you may discuss committee business, but no formal action can be taken. Requires the election of chair and vice chair. We've added the secretary to that. The position serves 1 year, and the chair is expected to maintain an aura of impartiality to run the meeting in a fair, equitable, civil manner, ensuring members of the public are provided an open forum to speak about the budget. Minutes for recording of each meeting must be kept. The approval of the final budget document, tax levies, and debt service amounts should be in the form of a motion. With the votes recorded in the minutes, as I mentioned, those motions will be in the back of your packet. And discussions of the budget committee must always take place in the form of a public meeting. So one of the things that we ask is that you not talk to each other about the budget outside of these meetings, but that does not preclude you from talking to the general public. A few more things I want to touch on. Let's see, Oregon budget law requires a budget committee. It requires the budget be developed and balanced by fund. We have, I think, almost 30 funds. Each one of these is essentially its own sort of separate business, that has its own financial reports, its own budget. Requires legal appropriations on some level. And this gets to that third item I mentioned, which is expenditure control. Our legal appropriation is by fund, by department, by category. And then those categories are made up of operating, which is all of our 500, 600, and 700,000 accounts added together. Then capital projects, our 800,000 accounts are its own legal of appropriation. And then the 900,000 accounts, which are miscellaneous fiscal transactions, that includes debt service, interfund transfers. Each one of those is also its own legal level. Let's see, it requires the fiscal year to be July 1st to June 30th, encourages public involvement by public hearings, and serves to control spending by limiting changes the city can make. So as part of this process, one of the things, in addition to the legal level appropriations, which we cannot exceed, we also have reserves, which are adopted, and those are dollars that are locked up for future years. And there's very specific rules regarding how you can access those reserves. And it's very limited. If you want any additional information on Oregon budget law, you can find it at the Department of Revenue website, which I have up on the screen. And it can also be found in Oregon revised statutes beginning at 294.305. And finally, I've talked about all the requirements around putting together a budget. It begs the question, who follows up on this? And the answer is our auditors. As part of our annual audit, they will also look at compliance with state laws and regulations. In the back of our ACFR, which is our annual comprehensive financial report, in the compliance section, there's a report from the auditors, and you can find our ACFR on our website for fiscal year 27's budget. That's going to be in the fiscal year 26 ACFR. That will be on our website sometime next January. But in the back of there is a report from our auditors, independent auditors report required by Oregon state regulations. And in there, they talk about, as part of our obtaining reasonable assurance about whether the city's financial statements are free of misstatements, we perform certain tests of compliance. About the middle of the report, it'll have all the procedures they perform. The third bullet is budgets legally required. And then at the bottom of that page, there's going to be this section that's the most important section. In connection with our testing, nothing came to our attention that caused us to believe the city was not in substantial compliance. So essentially a clean bill on that. So that's the way you follow up on the process afterwards. And if anyone is unable to make it to any of the evenings, please let myself or Jessica let me know. And that actually concludes my training presentation this evening. Any questions? Perfect. Michael.
Thank you. All right, well, I call the meeting of the Springfield Budget Committee portion to order. Could we have roll call, please?
Absolutely. Counselor Weber.
Here.
Counselor Mo.
Here.
Counselor Rodley. Here. Counselor Quadros.
Here.
Counselor Buck.
Here.
Counselor Stout is excused. Jason Miller.
Here.
Michael Weiss.
Here.
Michael Roman.
Here.
Ruth Linos.
Here.
Elliot Harwell.
Here.
Bob Brew.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Well, before we begin this evening, I would like to take a moment to outline the protocol and expectations for the business from the audience portion of the agenda. First, I want to thank everyone for being here and for taking the time to participate. Public input is an essential part of our decision-making process, and we value the opportunity to hear from our community. If you wish to speak, have not yet signed up, please complete a request to speak card and hand it to the Deputy Finance Director. Speakers will be called in order in which they signed up. Once your name is called, please come forward to the table, state your name and ward for the record, and then begin your remarks. If you are attending online, please raise your virtual hand. Speakers may have up to 3 minutes. Time limits may be adjusted based on the number of participants. We ask that all speakers and audience members maintain respectful conduct throughout the business from the audience portion of the meeting. This means no interruptions, no applause, and no verbal reactions, positive or negative, while others are speaking. This ensures a safe and fair space for every participant. Offensive language or disruptive behavior will not be permitted. With those guidelines in place, we look forward to hearing from everyone. So next on the agenda is the election of a chairperson, vice chairperson, and secretary. And I would like to open up the floor for nominations for the position of chair.
I move nomination of Michael Roman as chair this year.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for the positions of chair?
Seconded.
Right. Great. Okay, thank you. All of those in favor, please say aye. All opposed,
Aye.
all opposed, say nay. Great. Next, I would like to open up the floor for nominations for the position of vice chair.
I would like to nominate Jason Miller as vice chair.
I will second that.
All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Thank you. Finally, I would like to open up the floor for nominations for the position of secretary.
I would like to nominate Elliot Harwell as secretary.
Second that.
All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Great. Next on the agenda, City Manager Nancy Newton is here to provide opening remarks and delivery of the budget message.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Budget Committee. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge our Star Wars fans. May the Fourth be with you. Tonight begins the formal review of City of Springfield's proposed budget for fiscal year 2026-27. This step is required under Oregon budget law, as Nathan explained earlier. And it initiates the review process that is required prior to the budget advancing to the City Council for action and adoption. The proposed budget is developed using best practices for local governments as guideline. These include working towards structural balance, limiting the use of one-time resources, maintaining reserves, and accounting for long-term obligations. While not all of these can be fully achieved within current constraints, they provide a clear framework for responsible financial decision-making. Springfield, like most Oregon cities, continues to face structural financial constraints. The cost of providing services, including public safety, infrastructure, and meeting state and federal requirements, continue to outpace revenue growth. These obligations are largely outside of the city's control and are often not fully funded. Inflation and increasing service demands further limit our flexibility. This budget reflects a deliberate effort to balance a broad range of city functions within available resources. It includes the necessary adjustments across departments to align, expenditures with current reserves while maintaining operational continuity. This is also the first budget cycle following the work of the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force. Concepts developed through that effort help inform ongoing discussion about the city's long-term financial outlook, including the structural gap in the general fund. This budget represents initial steps in that direction with additional work to follow. Tonight, each department will present their future year considerations. This will provide clarity on how the city is balancing its needs, its wants, with available resources and requirements over time. The Budget Committee's role is to review the proposed budget and provide input. And then the mayor and city council retain a responsibility for final decisions and adoption. Maintaining long-term financial stability remains our priority. This includes addressing deferred maintenance, preserving the city's bond rating, and ensuring the city can meet its obligations in a sustainable manner. This proposed budget represents a measured, responsible approach within a constrained financial environment. I think you're all very well aware of that, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage for the information you'll be hearing tonight and the subsequent evenings. And with that, I will turn my time over to Nathan Bell. Thank you.
Next up, Finance and IT Director Nathan Bell will provide us with the introduction of the budget.
Thank you. So for anyone newly joining us, I'm Nathan Bell, the city's finance director. And with tonight's this presentation, I want it to be a conversation. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. And if you don't mind, Chair, I will call on folks if they have questions. All right. So this year, actually, I've got a completely different slide deck. It's not going to look like it's looked at it has. It's not going to look like it has in the past. Well, this feels like a different year. There's a lot more interest in our budget process than I have ever experienced in my time at the city over 20 years. This is a conversation that has been happening over years. And specifically, Nancy had mentioned that this is our first budget cycle after the Fiscal Stability Task Force and the recommendations. And this really is the first year that we are using this as a tool to implement those recommendations. And it's really not just putting together the fiscal year 27 budget. We put this budget together with an eye on the next decade. So if you want to enact change, a lot of times to make a change in the future, it can be a lot of small incremental changes in the near term that have a cumulative impact over the course of time. And that's really what we're doing here. And so this year, I have one slide in here. I realized it was there. I'm not going to go over the agenda. I did that as part of the budget training. Actually, this is the wrong presentation.
This is last year. Are you serious? So
Give us 1 second. FY 27 budget overview. Drop down to. Yes, thank you. Okay. I started on the other deck and I was like, oh, this isn't gonna work. I should have deleted it.
Hit it from yourself.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump straight into the fund. Starting with proposed FY 27, that's the budget you're looking at in the packet. If you go down to the current operating revenue over expenditures, it has a negative $450,000. That is a deficit spend, and what that means is we're actually using reserves to the tune of $450,000 to balance this year's budget. So another thing I'd like to mention about is you can see that close increases on even years. So we're seeing a big jump in fiscal year 28, and then that just grows thereafter. This actually looks better than last year's. I looked at last year's forecast, and it actually looks better if you can imagine that. And part of the reasons we implemented one of the task force recommendations, which was to increase our fire levy to cover the full cost of that fifth engine crew. And that took about $1 million of pressure off of the general fund. So that has had a positive impact on this forecast. Another component that is in here was another one of the recommendations from the task force, which was a $500,000 reduction to the library. We didn't do a $500,000 reduction, but we did do a $310,000 reduction. And that's also reflected in this budget. What's not in here is the payroll tax. That is still happening outside of this process with the council. It's scheduled for a second final hearing on June 1st, but that's just kind of a separate path. It hasn't been adopted. So at this point, we're not counting that until we know that it's a certain thing. Part of the reason this forecast looks the way it did is, and I'm going to talk about the primary reason, measure 5 and 50 in a moment. But with that collar on revenue, we had decades of historically low inflation, and that gave us a long time frame to make lots of small adjustments. With the pandemic, we saw a period of years of really high inflation. And what brought a distant deficit spend all the way to the present was that high inflation. And that is still working its way through the system. We actually are anticipating inflation returning to 3% or lower in our forecast. And when we put this together a few months ago, that seemed like a reasonable assumption. Unfortunately, in the past couple months, there's been some global events that have maybe changed how reasonable that assumption is at this point. All of our contracts but one are opening up. We're currently in negotiations with our police bargaining group. Their contract expires at the end of fiscal year 26 on June 30th of this year. And then our ASME and our fire bargaining groups expire at the fiscal year 27. So we don't even know what the impact of those negotiations will be. The only settled contract we have right now is our SEIU contract. And then our non-union typically follows that one. It's settled, and they're going to see a compensation based on a market study that's currently underway. And that new market compensation plan will go into place on July 1st, 2027. So that'll impact 2028, fiscal year 28. So there's a lot of uncertainty on the horizon right now with their personnel, and that really makes up the lion's share of our expenditures. What you'll see in here as well is a transfer to the street fund. This is related to a right-of-way fee that the general fund collects, but then passes on to the street fund. So that's something we've had in place for years. It's essentially a subsidy to our street fund. Our street fund has its own challenges, similar to the general fund. However, our general fund has some very critical public safety services that tends to be the focus usually of the conversations in the budget committee. And then a transfer to the ambulance fund. Those numbers were projected prior to and it's not I guess it hasn't been adopted yet, but in our master fees and charges, there is a proposed increase to our transport fee. If that master fees and charges is adopted as it's currently being moved forward, that should have a positive impact on that transfer to the ambulance fund. So that could help reduce some of that deficit spend that you see up there. I think the last thing I want to mention on here, or two things. One is the ending cash as a percent of operating expenditures. With that deficit spend, we're projecting 26% ending cash as that percentage. And why that's important is we recently, when we did our street bond, we went through the rating process with Moody's and our bond rating, we have a solid bond rating. And it's one of the things we've been trying to, it impacts our interest that we can borrow at. So we're always wanting to get it moved up, improved. And, we've been told for a city of our size with our sort of industry and kind of lack of diversity of industry, that we have a lot of demographics going against us in terms of getting that bond rating. However, unfortunately, it isn't hard to have it downgrade. And that is through the mismanagement of the city's finances. One of the things that they really liked seeing was that our ending cash was above 25%. If they state in their document to us that if that was ever to drop below 25%, that could be a justification for decreasing our bond rating. So that's something that we're being very mindful of when we put our budget together. And as you can see, based on our projected deficit spend in 28, it has it well below that 25%. And then I think the last thing I want to mention is this does not include any deferred maintenance on city facilities and infrastructure. And I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. And it doesn't include the financial impact of the fire governance structure. We have functionally merged fire department with the city of Eugene, and we've actually for the last couple of years have been engaged in a conversation about the future governance structure. There's been a recognition that as it's currently designed, the functional merger is not working. It's working great on the operational side. It's not working well on the administration side. To the point that it's been decided that it needs to change. And two options that I'm looking at is going to an IGE, a governmental entity, where it would be separate, have its own employees and its own governing body, or potentially for the two communities to actually separate and stand up standalone fire departments in each community. Looking at either of those potential scenarios, they're both more expensive than our current model. And so we know that there's going to be an impact. We just don't know what that impact will be yet. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that functional merger is, what it's saving us. Yes.
Can I just ask for explanation on the line of the current operating revenue over expenditures? Is the end result of all 5 years a accumulation of over $14 million in the negative?
If we do nothing,
If we do nothing,
yes.
I just want
And
to.
we're doing things.
Okay.
So, yes.
Question. What assumptions are you using for the next 5 years for those contracts that are up for renewals?
Well, that's not something I would publicly, we're in negotiations, so
Sure.
I don't want to tip our hand on that.
But in these forecasts?
In these forecasts, we make reasonable assumptions.
Okay.
Yes.
In every previous year, we've made a transfer to the ambulance fund. And in all subsequent fiscal years, we're making a transfer to the ambulance fund. What's different about this specific year?
Great question. So I wanted FY 27 to represent what is in the proposed budget package. We're anticipating a $350,000 transfer in fiscal year 27. How we typically do it is what we ask of departments is to control your expenditures to your revenues. And so our expectation is that they come within their budget. When I say come within their budget, not just for the legal of appropriation, but the revenues that have been assumed to support that. So we typically don't budget for a deficit spend. We expect them to come in, but if for whatever reason it doesn't come in, and for instance, last year, the transfer is going to happen in fiscal year 26, but it's because at the end of fiscal year 25, they had a negative fund spend of $1.2 million. And it was due to revenues that we were expecting, GEMT revenues to come in that haven't materialized. Those are still owed to the city. The reason we have a much smaller anticipating it's not on there, but I'm still expecting, we're expecting the state to get completely caught up with those GEMT revenues. While they're saying that they expect to be completely caught up, I'm still a little suspicious. That kind of comes with the territory of my job. So best indicator of future performance is past performance. So, but even with those revenues getting caught up, it doesn't solve the structural issue we have in the ambulance fund. And that's why, we've been seeing transfers and we anticipate potential future transfers. However, if the master fees and charges increase to the transfer fee goes through, that should help potentially address some of those deficit spends. We may not see those transfers happen as soon. But, it's another situation where we have a collared revenue, and how it's collared is we have these capitated rates, Medicare and Medicaid rates, where the federal government only pays roughly $400 for a transport that cost us $2,300 to do. And so that's just not a functioning or a working business line.
Then I guess I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
So the transfer to the street fund that's there is a right-of-way payment.
Yes.
But you've also said the street fund is structurally imbalanced. So how much do you anticipate transferring to the street fund that's not reflected here?
So with the ambulance fund, and I'll talk a little bit about this, is that's a service that you can't scale. And so we can't say, oh, let's reduce our staff and reduce our costs, and now we're gonna go reduce medical emergencies. It just doesn't work that makes sense. That's pretty much driven by really the population, what kind of the typical kind of medical emergency in that, kind of population. With the street fund, we will scale our services, and what ends up getting reduced is we have a lot of operational requirements, but it's our preservation activities that it's all trade-offs, and a lot of times it's our preservation activities, we'll discontinue them. So we'll just have to, not by choice, but just by funding, we'll have to stop doing certain activities in our street fund.
It's the deferred maintenance on city facilities.
Yes, and I'll talk kind of about the dollars associated with that and the impact of Milton preservation. All right. Unfunded maintenance. Some big numbers on here. And so with those numbers, and I'll explain a little bit about this. Let's start with the deferred capital maintenance. Our city hall, that building was built, I think, in the early 80s. It's a repurposed mall. So it's kind of an odd building to have as the city hall. That being said, we are still proud of it. It has deferred maintenance. We estimate around 36 million. Now it's not that meaning that we're gonna need to raise 36 million. It's a lot of times against trade-offs, but we can have concrete that's in disrepair that just, and it can go on for a period of time like that. We cannot paint, there's just certain things that you sometimes can just put off. And then there's other things like systems that, if they were to, malfunction, you might have to close the city hall. Right now, our HVAC system is at the end of life. I mean, going into this summer, we have concerns whether it's actually going to work when we get those high temperatures. That is a situation where we could have to go remote if that was to fail on us. We plan to come in front of the council with an HVAC and roof project here in the coming year that we think is going to be in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 million. So that's a real cost. We're actually going to have to find funding for. But a lot of that deferred maintenance, it's a trade-off again. It could potentially just get pushed off into the future. But when you're not staying on top of that, it tends to grow. And sometimes a small problem that is more expensive to fix can become a large problem that's more expensive to fix. Our operations facility, that is another repurposed facility. It was a mechanic and trucking yard from the early 60s. There we actually have roughly $30 million in deferred maintenance. We've got a building actually where the roof was failing, not just in terms of waterproof, but the actual structure failing to where we had to move employees out of that space and put them into modular units on the campus while that is addressed. So that's an example where something went much too long. Because of our funding or lack of funding, a lot of times our approach to maintenance is break fix. It's just when it becomes a crisis that we have no choice but to address. Our fire stations, we've got 5 fire stations. 3 of those stations 3, 5, and 16 have roughly $3 million in deferred maintenance. I'm not mentioning two other stations. I have them over in the deferred long-term investments, and I'll talk about those in a moment. Our street maintenance backlog. One of the cheapest ways to maintain an asset in terms of the cost of that asset over the life of that asset is preservation. And through crack sealing, slurry seals, and thin lift overlays, you can extend the life almost indefinitely on the street. However, if you let that street get to a point of disrepair, there is a point of no return where there's no preservation that can bring it back. It's essentially going to be a rebuild from the ground up. And that is the most expensive way to take care of your street infrastructure. For us to have a street preservation program that will stay on top of our preservation needs, and we have a significant backlog, but if we weren't backlogged and we were staying on top of it, we would probably need to double our street operations budget from 2.3 to 4.6 million. So that's 2.3 million annually if we were to stay on top of it. And then the Justice Center, the building that we're in this evening, this is unfortunately now 20 years old. We don't have any funding set aside, but we are starting to see systems that are starting to fail. So it is going to join that list of other facilities that have that deferred maintenance. Going over to the deferred long-term investments, our street infrastructure, our collector and arterial streets of our 70 miles, 30 miles of those are in fair to poor condition. And to bring those back to good condition, we'd be looking at about $165 to $227 million, 2023 dollars. And that doesn't even include our residential streets. Our street signal system is an antiquated system. If we were to implement the new modern radar technology that reads traffic, we'd be looking at about a $10 million upgrade. Glenwood infrastructure, that's part of our Glenwood urban renewal. That's one of the areas that we're looking towards for economic development, a way to grow our increment. So it's not cuts and it's not new taxes or increased taxes, is to generate economic development.
That $60 million is urban renewal or all equipment?
That 50 million is north of Franklin Boulevard, just the riverfront area. The urban renewal fund, it had a maximum indebtedness of 33 million. We've spent about half of it, so we've got about 16 million left. We have 50 million plus dollars in infrastructure needs without any identified funding. Two commercial facilities we have are Booth Kelly facility and the depot. They have about $30 million in deferred maintenance needs. North Gateway, that's another one of our economic development areas. About $2 million in planning needs and $30 million plus in infrastructure to open that area up to economic development. And then fire station relocation. 3 of our fire stations are over 50 years old, and they were built for a community that had a much different dynamic and service need. They are no longer ideally suited to the location to the service needs of this growing community. So they have significant deferred maintenance, but it wouldn't make sense to be putting money into that deferred maintenance when they really would be better sited somewhere else. Station 4 on 5th Street will move to our downtown area to where it could serve our Glenwood area as it develops. And then station 14 from 28th Street would move further south to the Jasper area to that growing residential development. So rather than repair, they should probably be moved in place. Each station would, I think we've got estimates of $7 to $10 million each. So that is a big number. It's not a number like we're going to find that money and do all this work. It's just part of the context of what we're thinking about, what we're dealing with as we're putting together our budget. Okay, how did we get here? There's a lot of small explanations, but there's really one big explanation, and that's Measure 5 and Measure 50. Measure 5 was in the early 90s, and it capped the total property tax revenue that you would pay to $5 per thousand for education, $10 per thousand for general government. And then measure 50. And that was originally measure 47. Measure 47 has some legal issues, so our legislature came together and fixed it so it actually could stand. And that became measure 50. That froze the tax rates and rolled them back to 1996 values. And then it limits the growth to 3% per year. And so now it separates what is, you have now a assessed value and a value. And just to give you an idea of the impact, the dark blue is the real market value of our property tax stock, and the light blue is that collared measure 50. You see it in 96 dropping down in 97, and then that 3% collar thereafter. This only goes through 2022. If you're in the real estate market right now or paying attention to prices, they just continue to rise. So that gap is even larger. And the challenge for us is that typically in a community, wages need to reflect the price of housing. And while it doesn't correlate perfectly, we do have to keep in mind those housing values to attract talent, to attract skill, people. They have to be able to afford to live within your community. So inflation in wages does somewhat kind of correlate with that. And the West Coast is known for high property values, but also for higher wages associated with them. So that has been our challenge, is when our revenues have been collared at 3% and personnel makes up the majority of our expenditures, our operating expenditures. That is what has produced that structural imbalance. So what have we done since measure 5 and 50? We've done a lot, and we've done primarily is we've cut and cut. And I've got slides that are gonna speak to that here in a little bit. We started out, I think, with measure 50 coming in anticipation of it. We cut 23 FTE. We added some of them back over the years, but then, you know, tough times hit it, and then we cut deeper each time that a challenging time hit. And I've got a graph that'll illustrate that. Another thing, when I talk about I should break into buckets, and I think there's similar buckets to the fiscal stability task force and the solutions they looked at. But we look at cost control, we look at revenue generation, whether it be increasing current revenues or introducing new revenues, and then we look at legislative and economic development initiatives. So that first bucket is the cost control, and it's been the FTE reduction. Another one was our IGA with the functional merger with Gene. We merged our administrative function, which, you know, each city had a chief, and then under this functional merger, we ended up just with all those key positions, one in each of those key positions. And that's where the savings come from. We know that continues to save us money, because if we were to separate and create a standalone department, there are key positions, a chief being one of them, that we would have to fill to actually have a standalone. And we are estimating a minimum of $1 million plus for us to be a standalone department. So every year we're functionally merged, we are saving money as a community. And then insurance and wellness initiatives. In fiscal year 13, we moved from a traditional insurance to a self-funded health insurance plan. And in fiscal year 16, we introduced an on-site wellness clinic. Those two initiatives have kept our health costs, our premiums flat for 14 years. That means no increase in the health premiums charged to all the funds for personnel. We've got an insurance fund where we accumulate reserves and have ups and downs. But overall, we've had 14 years of really good health experience. That is actually changing, and we had a bad year last year where we exceeded investments and we dipped in the reserves. And we're on track again for a second year. Our hope is that is an anomaly, that we're going to return back to that good experience. But there's a lot of change happening in the health care industry right now. And I think James is going to speak to that. I don't want to steal his thunder. So I will leave that at that. Revenue generation. In 2002, we introduced two levies, a fire levy, which was funding a fifth engine crew, and police levy for additional officers on the street and to support our municipal court, and then eventually to support our municipal jail. And then the IGA with Springfield Utility Board, they pay a pilot, it's a payment in lieu of tax. It was at around 3.5% of the gross electric revenue. That's actually low for utilities and pilots. Our peers, you mostly see 5% on gross revenues. And so working with Sub as a good partner, we increased our pilot from 3.5% to 5%. That brought in an additional $1 million annually of revenue into our general fund. And then into our growth strategies, UGB expansion, first going back, I want to say 80s or 90s, where our UGB was attached to Eugene. It was, and we had to separate from them. That allowed us to be a master of our own fate. And then we expanded our urban growth boundary. I don't know if I said it well, but we expanded it to increase both commercial and industrial land. Again, part of our economic development. Enterprise zone, that's a state program where new industry or expansion, increasing employment, 10% can get a 3-year tax exemption on their investment. They can get an additional 2 years if approved by the local jurisdiction. A lot of folks, I think, look at these like that's money given away, but in truth, a lot of these industries have national footprints. They're competing for where to invest into their communities. And whenever we've seen those enterprise zone exemptions expired, we've seen significant bumps in our assessed value. So they've actually worked out quite well. Fran's Bakery, Umpqua Dairy, International Paper, Swanson's Mill, Richardson Cap, Pacific Source, all very big taxpayers, big part of our tax base. So it's been a successful program for us. And then the last item, the Fiscal Stability Task Force. This is kind of gets into the strategy. I'll move on to the next slide. So back in the early part of 2025, the mayor convened a fiscal stability task force that met for 9 weeks every week from January till March. It was comprised of 12 community leaders, many with experience running large, complex businesses. And the goal was for them to develop a shared understanding of city services and finances and provide counsel with recommendations for sustainable funding of those services. Nothing was off limits, with the exception of fire governance. That was an already ongoing conversation that involved another city. So it couldn't be part of the fiscal stability task force, but everything else, nothing was off limits. We answered any question. And they looked at expenditure reductions, they looked at new or increased revenues, they looked at economic development, they looked at legislative initiatives. And one of our expectations that whatever they recommended would be a consensus recommendation. And that was pretty remarkable in and of itself. In that I, remember there were folks who came in and they're like, we are not increasing revenues. Like they came in and said, we're going to find, I'm sure there's inefficiencies. We're going to find expenditure reductions. And when they came in and they asked questions and we showed them everything, I was like, wow, you're a lean organization. And I'm gonna have a slide that will illustrate that, I think, in a moment. Quickly though, of their recommendations, they had cost reduction recommendations, they had revenue recommendations, and they had economic development and legislative. On the cost reductions, they recommended reducing the library budget by $500,000. We actually didn't do 500,000. We did $310,000. We felt that 500,000 was just too much, too much of an impact, a negative impact. And then they talked about implementing traffic cameras and it kind of tied together with decreasing public safety over time. The idea that technology would, maybe reduce our need of personnel or staff, kind of cap the growth. These are, recommendations. That is still something under consideration. I don't think any decision has been made regarding to the cameras on the public safety overtime, though. That's something we are just actively addressing. A lot of the overtime they were seeing was a result of something that was happening nationally with a lot of officers leaving the force. And it's not one of those things when you have vacancies, you can just immediately hire up. You've got to hire, you go up to the academy, it can take 9 months and they come back and they intern. It takes time and you can only have so many in the pipeline at any given time. So we've slowly staffed back up and we're seeing that overtime come down. Revenue options, a payroll tax to generate 2.3 million. That's being talked about right now. Increased the police and fire levies. We successfully increased the fire levy. The police levy, we'll be having conversations about that next spring, and that I think we could potentially be on the ballot in November of 27. And then the economic development legislative initiatives. New city-owned properties for sale or development, developed gateway employment area. I talked about the infrastructure needs for that to happen. Business retention, to develop a business retention and expansion strategy, and to pursue state tax reform. So the next few slides, and I'm almost done, are just kind of food for thought, to just get some context again to the conversation. This is FTE per 1,000 residents. And, residents population is what drives the service needs. So it's a good indicator in terms of where you're at and where you're going, and also compare yourself to peers. Going back to 97, fiscal year 97, I kind of see that as a high watermark. With Measure 50 coming in, you see that immediate cut. However, over the next few years, we've slowly built that back. And then some challenging times, it looks like there in 01, 02, we cut back down until 05. Then we start to build back up again, and then the Great Recession hits, and we start cutting in 09, fiscal year 09. And essentially, those cuts have just kind of bottomed out, plateaued, and stayed there. We went from a high watermark of 4.94 FTE per 1,000. We're currently at 3.42 FTE. What's the right number? I don't know, but I can tell you that 3.42 is lean. Citywide FTE reduction since fiscal year 09. I didn't go all the way back to 97, but since 09, starting with internal support departments, we've been cutting, and we've been cutting every department. Internal support departments would include finance, HR, IT, city manager's office, and the city attorney's office. So over that period of time, net reduction of, and it's a net, because there's been some ebbs and flows, but it's a net reduction of 3.5. In fire and life safety, a net reduction of 8 positions. In police, a net reduction of 6 positions. Now remember, our population has grown, our service needs have grown. A lot of these are departments that we can't scale the service needs to those cuts, but we've made those cuts. Development of Public Works, almost 4 FTE, and then library, 1.9. That includes the current recommended cut, by the way. And it's less than, because actually when we were cutting some of the other departments, we actually had added to the library at the same time. Just recognizing what important service it was to us. We've just hit a point where we've just lost places where we can cut and scale services. That's Bob.
So fire and life safety, part of that is due to the merger with.
Yes. All right, and I've talked about scaling. I've cut in finance over the same period of time. The workload, the complexity has grown. Additionally, I can't, if I cut a position, I still have to produce an act firm. I still have to produce a budget. I still have to follow procurement rules. I still have to pay bills. I can't change the workload. Just have to do that work with less staff. And that's a similar way for a lot of other departments. We have very few departments where we can actually scale the service and the hours of operation and what we do to the staffing level, so we don't put an undue burden on those employees. All right, this is something I like to show folks, because it's something I don't think is really understood by the public. This is our fiscal year 27 general fund, FY27 general fund budget. It's a $50 million budget. And so looking at that as a pie, the largest slice is public safety, coming in at 73% of our general fund budget. That includes police, fire, and municipal courts. That's not the full cost, because our administrative services, I mentioned that's our finance, HR, IT, city manager's office, the attorney's office. That is not embedded within all the departments. It's separate in the general fund, and we allocate it out to the departments, but only if they're in separate funds. Because public safety is in the general fund, we don't allocate directly to them. But if we were to allocate their share of administrative costs, we base it on FTE. they make up 40% of the FTE. They would have 40% of that $7 million for an additional 3 million. So the full cost of public safety is that 36 million plus 3 is around $39 million. Now, we got the same pie. It's now revenues, $50 million. And it shows you all the revenues that support those services. Let's go to the largest share of that pie. It's our property taxes, $29 million. Public safety costs, $39 million. Property taxes don't even cover the full cost of public safety, let alone any other service that we provide. And I don't know if the public understands that. Superimposing public safety over that revenue pie. And how we've made up the difference is we have looked to other types of revenues to essentially as a subsidy to public safety. And we have leaned, like when we look at our peers, our police officers on the street, we have the lowest number of officers per 1,000 FTE of our peer community. So it's not that we're, extravagant to begin with. And yet we're challenged because of that collar on property taxes. And we're getting to that point where we're running out of revenues really that we can lean on. In there, you have intergovernmental, that's $3 million from a sub for the pilot that we renegotiated that. That's all going to the general fund when, that's for their use of the right of way and there's impacts they have on our street infrastructure. Yet none of that goes to the street fund. Another one would be in our license and fees and franchising programs. Again, it's for being in our right of way and it has an impact on our street infrastructure. Or in the case of Santa Pac, where we have a franchise fee, the impact of their large trucks on our street infrastructure. That might be better along with a different service at the city, yet the general fund has needs have essentially sort of just absorbed all of those revenues just to support public safety. That's it. Any other questions for me?
Nathan, would it be fair to say that if we had kept pace with the increase over the period of time of our property tax revenues had been incrementally increased, higher, would we essentially have been paying the revenue that you're now seeing in the safety levy plus our property taxes? So when you combine them, that's really what our property taxes would have paid of a volume of funding.
Yeah, I'll ask well some others, but yes, and essentially and I don't even think, you could say the intent of Measure 5 and 50 was understandable. And because you were seeing massive inflation in property and you had folks on fixed income potentially getting priced out of their houses. But, let's look at another state that did something similar, which is California. They have a reset on resale. So the person who's on that fixed income in their house, it gets to have the benefit of that collar. But when that new person buys that house, why does that collar and that locked low rate transfer to that new person? So there's things that we could do to still, kind of get at the reasons behind it, but still also find a way to adequately fund the services that are associated with that. If that makes sense. But if we didn't have that collar, we would not be in this situation. Or it wouldn't be as bad.
You mentioned a couple of options on the fire department. One you didn't mention was the independent fire district. If there was an independent fire district formed by Agina Springfield, those costs would go to the new district, but Springfield would keep their existing levy. Is that correct?
We wouldn't have a fire levy if we didn't have a fire.
No, I mean, we keep our existing general fund levy. I mean, our existing general permanent rate.
Potentially. And so, yes, I don't think there's any way to reduce your rate. There's talk, well, you could just not impose the entire amount that you're allowed to. But then there's that question of, can we trust that that would be the case indefinitely into the future? But yes, there is a scenario where we keep the permanent rate of 474 and then they have a new permanent rate for that new district on top of that.
I would add that's really venturing into the realm of a policy decision for future council members. So I don't think it's really fair to ask Nathan, you know, it's, as staff, we try to be pretty neutral on that opinion.
It's asking a factual question, so thank you.
Okay, back. Thank you, Nathan. So at this time, I would like to recess the Springfield Budget Committee for 10 minutes for a brief break. So the committee will reconvene at 6:46. Department Director. Please refrain from asking questions tonight, as we will have the opportunity at tomorrow's meeting to ask questions of department directors. First up is City Attorney Mary Bridget Smith to talk about the Legal Services Department.
Good evening, Budget Committee. Notes on my phone. Good evening. So we were asked to come up and present to the Budget Committee our thoughts on considerations for the next, I would say, 3 to 5 years. Different from, or in addition to the information that we provided in our Budget Committee pages. And in thinking about this item, I think there are, from the city attorney's perspective, and our office's perspective, probably 3 emerging areas that I see as issues to keep an eye on as the city moves forward. The first would be to be thinking about minimizing liability and how we operate and trying to operate with more intentionality. I think as the city of Springfield moves from a smaller city to a medium-sized city with more complex needs, and requirements, that it's important that our process and our procedures and how we act is consistent. So we don't want to be in a situation where things are done differently from department to department or over time, and that we document how we do our work. That way, as we grow, it's scalable and we're able to do it ourselves if there is a claim. The second area I would think about is applying that same framework of intentionality to governance. You know, we've really enjoyed in the past year an increase in public participation here in our local government, which I think is a great sign for our community and we're happy about. But I think that also means that we need to work on making sure that our decision makers have the information that they need so they can do defensible decisions. So our process is solid, our documents are clear and understandable. So trying to be intentional there. I think the third area I think about is, really just reflecting that we're in a really challenging time right now with our other government partners. We rely on state and federal government for funding, for guidance, for regulations, for decision from the boards. And what we're finding now, when looking at the federal government is that they've gone through a lot of change, and what that can mean for us is some uncertainty in funding and grant requirements, new things coming down, and then on the state level, a lot of regulations being pushed down to local governments like Springfield. And that really puts us in a situation of being, I would say, reactive as opposed to proactive. And spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to respond to those. So what we've been thinking about and what we've been working on over this past year is figuring out where we can leverage our relationships with other local governments and sort of where can Springfield collaborate with other local governments that are dealing with these same issues? Where do we lead? Where can we get information from? So we can figure out that we're not just spending all our time reacting to these new sort of situations that we're dealing with, and how to do that in a way I think that's effective. And I think looking back on those 2 first areas, also thinking about technology and AI. Where are places where Springfield can make smart investments about AI to assist us in helping our community and providing services? And where is, maybe the technology not quite right, or would it create more liability in some instances? So always kind of keeping that lens. So those were the 3 areas that I thought of in terms of our sort of other future considerations. And I don't have anything more to add, but I don't know if you have questions or how you want to work.
Well, we're thinking of holding off on questions tomorrow night, just let everyone get through it. If we can tonight to make that possible.
Great. Well, that's all.
Thank you, Mary. Next, I would like to call up Library Director Emily David to talk about the library department.
Good evening. So I'm Emily David, Director of the Library and the Museum, where we seek to help our community connect, discover, connect, and grow. So thinking about future year considerations, I think there's a lot of uncertainty for us, or there's uncertainty. With the proposed budget cuts, we will have 11 FTE dedicated to library services. That's the smallest the staffing has been in the nearly 18 years that I've been here. And that will also mean a reduction in our hours, which will be the fewest hours that we've been open in my tenure. So when I think about how to handle this, I think, you know, our library and museum staff, like all staff in the city, are very dedicated and passionate about the service that they provide to the city. And so I think that we have to start with a conservative baseline of services to make sure that we don't burn out and that we, you know, with our staff capacity. So with this in mind, we will be cutting programming or some of our programming, and we'll also be eliminating most of our outreach. And that's difficult because that's how we reach the greater community. In 2021, we had some focus groups that, especially out in Thurston and in Gateway, and what we heard from them is that we need to meet them where they are. And so we have to figure out how are we going to meet the needs of the greater community without doing outreach. So, and during the budget discussions, there was a lot of talk about our programming and what's necessary. So we've got a survey that we've put together for the community, and that'll be going out. We'd hoped it would go out earlier in the year, but it'll go out hopefully in the summer. And so we want to hear from the community what is important to them about in library and museum services. And then we'll also be working with our support groups that work as liaisons between our department and the community, hearing from them on their recommendations. And then we also hope to hear from city leadership. And so we will be working on, you know, how do we right fit our services for the community? We've had to cut our dedicated teen programming and our teen advisory board with the loss of our teen services librarian. And so what we're looking at as far as the programming in the future to maintain is really focusing on early literacy, which is one of our strengths and very important, but also literacy in general. We also provide a lot of tech help for folks, and that's very important. We have older community members that come in that need a lot of help. So tech help will be a priority. And also we want to maintain our Spanish language and cultural programming. So we'll have a 6-month review next year of what we're of our programming, and if we're hitting the right place for both the community and the capacity of our staff. So then also we'll be looking at a new ILS, which is our integrated library system. That's what runs the online catalog, as well as our patron account database. And so we're in we'll be in our 7th year of a 7-year contract. So we'll have an RFP that goes out, and we share that system with LCAL, which is the Lane Council of Libraries. So the 7 smaller libraries in Lane County work together and have this system. It allows us to share materials. So, but Springfield administers that. And so we're looking at an open source system, which could really be significant savings in the future. There'll be a cost for the migration from one system to the other, but then there should be some significant savings. So we're looking at that going forward. And so then in the museum, really soon, we are looking forward to reopening. We've been closed for 6 months. And we will open with a new gallery, a remodeled gallery that will allow have flexible exhibit space there, so we can accommodate gatherings. It's become a pretty popular gathering space for the community. And we will continue to seek sustainable funding for our collections technician in the museum. So the museum staff is paid out of the 208 or the transient lodging tax fund. So that's stable, but we have a a grant funded position that works on collection care and cleaning up our catalog, and also is responsible for our online database of historical photos. She's been just really vital in that work. So we're looking for sustainable funding for that position. And then we're running out of space in the museum for the collections, and the space at Booth Kelly isn't really safe for collections. So we need to be looking, this is more of a long term, but looking for space accommodation for the museum, as well as some significant building needs. There will need a new roof soon. We've had a terrible leak for the last several years. And the collection of our illumination program that centers marginalized community voices and stories in order to ensure that our museum represents our entire community has been in great demand. There's been a lot of requests for those collections to go out to our to our schools in their libraries, and also to a lot of community groups. So this past year, we had a grant to develop some traveling exhibits. And so those exhibits will be going out soon, hopefully in the fall. So we're excited about that. And then finally, in early 2027, we'll be doing a recruitment for a new director because I will be retiring. So I'll retire in July of 27. So you see there's quite a bit of change and uncertainty coming up for our department. And what I can say is that I know that our staff will continue to welcome people into our space in a very respectful way and continue to meet their needs as they come through the door. I also just want to say that libraries remain vitally important as third spaces. And so I really think it's important that we find sustainable funding for our library going forward.
Thank you. Next, I would like to call up Acting Incapacity Operations Director Ben Gibson to talk about the Operations Division.
Good evening, Budget Committee. I'd like to, first of all, thank you all for your service on behalf of operations. I have this bullet pointed list that I was going to bring with me, but after hearing Nate speak, I think that he set me up pretty well. I don't want to reiterate some of the things he did that he's already spoken on, but one of the things that we know is that we have a street fund that has some issues, as well as our general fund. And so as far as the street fund goes, one of the things that we really want to focus on, as well as facilities in the general fund, is preservation. That's been talked about. It's one of the things that we really need to focus on. We need to be able to preserve our assets so that we can gain as much useful life out of them as possible. And one of the ways that we can do that is by strengthening and increasing our capacity in data management. Data management through our Geographical Information Systems program is something that we have currently and are exponentially expanding on into the future. I think that with our streets programs and our facilities programs, if we can better understand and retrieve the data out of the work that we do on those and analyze that work, that will build continue to operate as lean as possible until we just can't anymore, because things do have an end of life, right? For streets, for example, one of the greatest preservation tactics you can have is slurry sealing. And we will be doing that this year, but potentially in the future that will go away for a while. But we will continue crack sealing as much as possible. And through street condition indexes to surveying, we can understand how our work is going to lengthen the life of those. In our stormwater programs, we have roughly 30 plus acres worth of stormwater facilities that we have to work on. And that same data management tool that we have will be able to better set us up in the future for where our priorities are going to be. how we can continue to maintain those facilities so that we introduce clean water into our rivers going into the future. And I think lastly, I would just like to mention one thing that we don't usually talk about is our incident management. We have probably over the last 5 to 8 years had a turnover rate of 75% within our staff, which brings a ton of training to those new people. And a lot of that training can be done through incident management systems. I think from what I understand, on average, every 3 years, we're having some kind of weather event, right? Whether it be weather, traffic, incidents or whatnot, we need a staff that's gonna be, trained to the best of their ability to protect our citizens and be able to respond when necessary. And, I think that's gonna.
Thank you, Ben. Next, I would like to call up Community Development Director Jeff Paschal to talk about the community development.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. Again, Community Development Director, Jeff Pascal, part of DPW. So yeah, just like Nathan hit on a lot of some of the issues we're facing, very similar to many other departments. One thing when I think about that in the general fund is when I look ahead and what we have to do is right now we're managing the workload that we have in planning, both current and comprehensive planning. But that means really what we're tackling is all of the state mandated work. So we're managing that. Doesn't allow us that freedom to move and tackle some of the things like what were brought up, like the North Gateway area, some of our economic development areas. And so we're not as flexible or nimble in that way, just because all of that state mandated work comes down and there's no funding associated with it. So really an eye to that. We're in a reactive mode rather than a really proactive mode. I think the other thing I think of is with the street fund, you've heard enough about that for now, is I also think we manage 2 other funds, the stormwater and wastewater. Those funds are currently healthy. We're managing those. We are able to get to the work we have. But I think when I think of the next, 3 to 5 years, the goal is, and Matt's going to talk a little bit about the new permits, but when I think about all of those pressures on there, the key of making sure that we're continually looking at our strategic financial plan so that we keep those funds healthy and we can make sure that we're trying to keep rates affordable for the community, but still meet all of the needs that we need to. And so that's another, I think the other thing I think about when we have changes, we're managing our vacancies in order to make sure that we can shift things around and be flexible with funding. So anytime there's opportunities, my management team and I, we're always looking at that and how can we shift things around? How can we do things better? Some of that's with staffing, putting them in areas where we have the highest need. And that might be alternative funding. So we're always looking at take pressures off some of those funds that are in distress. The other is we're continually looking, especially on our development center, the way we can bring in either tools, whether that's online tools, or just manage our work more efficiently so that we can continue to have a high rate of turnaround, but not necessarily need more FTE. So we're continually looking at those opportunities and we'll continue to do that. I think that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, apologies, I mispronounced your last name. I'll get it right tomorrow. Next, I would like to call up Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission Director Matt Stouter to talk about the Environmental Services Division.
Good evening, Budget Committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Matt Stouter for the city's Environmental Services Director. Working on behalf of everyone in Springfield, also get the privilege of being the Executive Director of MWMC, working on behalf of everybody in the entire region. We serve about 275,000 people and run a large utility, and we're doing so in a period of significant financial volatility. So that's a little bit about my messaging tonight. I wanted to outline basically some major challenges and risk areas that I see in the next 3 to 5 years, and then talk about a few specifics. First, mandatory regulatory investment. We're seeing, as because of the Clean Water Act and the permissive The way the Clean Water Act works, of continuing to issue permits that give us new requirements that are more stringent than our previous ones. We're seeing larger continued capital needs. We're seeing more requirements that are coming to keep quality improvements going. That's coming in the form of more rate increases to meet those mandates. So we're asking our residents to continually pay more to meet these new mandates. Second, aging assets, that's been touched on a little bit tonight. Regional treatment system, we have over $500 million worth of assets that we own and maintain. In the local collection system in Springfield, we have over 1,000 miles of pipelines in the wastewater and stormwater systems. Those systems are of a various age. They need to be maintained and replaced. On the regional side, we don't have the luxury of not maintaining those. We have to because we can't have not clean water going into the system. We'll be sued. On the local side, we have similar requirements, but they're not as stringent. We're not able to keep up with maintaining those systems because of the mandatory regulatory investments that we're making, talked about earlier. 3, federal funding support withdrawal and shifting federal policy that's been mentioned. When the treatment facility was constructed in the early 80s, 75% of that facility was funded through the construction grants program, and it was done so federally. At current levels, the federal participation is less than 4% when it comes to wastewater and stormwater infrastructure. We're seeing continued pressure and cuts for the systems that do exist right now in the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund Program and the Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or WIFIA funding. So the way to say that is basically where the federal government was participating at a large level, all the costs that we're seeing now are on the backs of the current ratepayers and community. 4, persistent cost inflation. I think people are familiar with that. We're a large utility, equipment, utilities, labor costs, chemicals, those are all inflating at high rates. That's coming from a variety of things like tariffs, labor shortages, supply chain disruptions. For example, we source sodium hypochlorite at the plant from a plant in Washington. It was disrupted last year for a period of a week, and there was questions about whether or not we could adequately disinfect our wastewater before discharge. And this is the only supplier in the region. And lastly is just the revenue uncertainty and affordability challenges. I mentioned that basically costs are increasing at a time when it's not optimal for folks. It's a really difficult time all the way around. So specifically, 20-year challenges. We have a 20-year facilities plan that we've identified. On the regional side, that's about $350 million worth of needed investment at our treatment facility. The largest area of concern right now is with our solids processing. We need to do some expansion out there with our lagoons and also continue to address the biosolids that we create and disposing of those as fertilizer on ryegrass farms in cooperation with area farmers. On the local side and the regional side, both, one of our biggest challenges is going to be the renewed discharge permits that authorize us to discharge water and clean wastewater to the rivers. Springfield has an MS4 permit. It's a stormwater permit that DEQ issues to us every 5 years. This last permit was very stringent, much more onerous than the previous one. We've managed to meet those requirements, and we're expecting a new permit to be issued this summer by DEQ. It's going to come with increased inspections, increased reporting and monitoring requirements, increased engineering analyses needed, materials tracking, et cetera. And it's going to basically manifest itself in continued pressure on our user fees over time. Same thing is expected on the wastewater side, and that'll be in fiscal year 28. And then the last thing I'll mention is that we're tracking with potential regional service area expansion. There's interest in outlying communities, Crestwell and Junction City, joining into the regional wastewater system. And that's something we're helping to evaluate the engineering feasibility of that, the cost analysis, the benefits. Springfield's ratepayers if that were to occur. So with that, end my class.
Thank you, Matt. Next, I would like to call up Police Chief Jamie Resch to talk about the police department.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I am Jamie Resch, Chief of Police, and I'll be sharing with you kind of our thoughts for this year's budget and then kind of our focus moving forward in addition. With our budget, we really strive to maintain a level of service to our community and also stability. And I did write something a little bit more formal because I will go off task easily, so I'm gonna pay a little bit more attention to my notes. This proposed fiscal year 2027 budget really reflects our deliberate commitment to stability, ensuring that our response to all calls for service and our response times remain consistent. Visibility in our neighborhoods and support services remain consistent for our residents, our businesses, and anyone who visits our city. I think that this continued growth that Springfield is experiencing is wonderful. It's a great display of how our city is working and why people want to come here and live here. But it also places additional demands on our public safety. And to maintain those levels of service that our community expects, we must grow alongside with the city. Our calls for policing service increasingly require more time, more specialized resources, and ongoing follow-up, especially in areas around addiction, mental health, and digital crime. So some of our key focuses to make sure that we are maintaining our services are going to be staffing. And Nathan talked a little bit about our staffing. We have made significant progress in recruitment, reducing our vacancies. We've hired new police officers, new detention officers, and record staff. Sustaining our adequate staffing levels across our entire department is going to continue to require our attention. Competitiveness and adaptability in how we attract and retain new members is important. But what I find, and probably I would probably stress is even a little bit more important, is that we ensure that we're hiring members with the skills, judgment, and professionalism it takes to be a Springfield Police Department member. Without that, our foundation for maintaining our service levels becomes increasingly difficult. Another major focus for us is technology, and technology changes very, very fast. The department is taking measured steps to modernize the process in ways we improve both efficiency and service delivery. And we are investing in digital forensics to hopefully strengthen our ability to investigate increasingly sophisticated crimes, particularly those involving mobile devices, which everybody has, and crimes involving online exploitation. At the same time, we're evaluating our tools like our body-worn cameras, which are due up for replacement pretty soon, and looking for things that can also help the community as far as translation and transcription services that are available to new technology that would hopefully streamline some of our workflows, reduce some of our administrative tasks, and improve our responsiveness and then community experiences as well. We are also looking to continue to build on our successful partnerships and programs. Our jail was recently accredited, which kind of demonstrates our strong commitment to best practices and risk reduction. And then programs like our grant-funded jail-based medication-assisted treatment program show how targeted programs can really reduce recidivism, and support long-term community health and safety. As Nathan also mentioned, the police levy we will be talking about that in the near future. It expires in 2028, so we will have to have decisions made around that. And we will constantly be also reevaluating our response and to mobile crisis. That's also changing and how that works in our community. And we'll need to make sure that we're giving resources to those calls for service as well. So overall, we're trying to look to maintain our services, really trying to balance what the community wants and expects with what we can provide and making sure that we're not reducing any service. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Next, I would like to call up Eugene Springfield Fire Chief Mike Caven to talk about the Fire and Life Safety Department.
Evening, Council Budget Committee members, I'm Mike Caven, Fire Chief, Eugene Springfield Fire. And whereas Star Wars is awesome, but we decided to acknowledge International Firefighters Day and the fact that I get to represent an amazing fire department here tonight. So Eugene Springfield Fire, before we kind of get into our successes and what we're looking for, just so folks understand, we're the largest fire department outside of the Portland metro area and Oregon's largest public ambulance transport provider. So Our staff serve about 3/4 of the county's residents, in particular around EMS and ambulance transportation, which is obviously a concern for various reasons. But in the last year, one of our basic successes is growing the fire department to a 4-platoon system or 4 shifts of firefighters to address the workforce's well-being, mental health, physical health, all of the negative impacts we know to this job, and stay competitive in the market that is increasingly competitive again to achieve firefighter, paramedics, and senior role staff. And so recruitment is one of our long-term focuses in a place where we haven't typically needed to invest, but we plan to invest in a team who are out doing that to make sure our fire department stays staffed and we don't have to rely on an overabundance of overtime to do so. Responses, we've seen some good changes around our response dynamics. 3 years ago, exceeding 100,000 unit responses, making policy level choices to measure and reduce those to the right resource for the right calls. And last year we were down to 93,000 unit responses. And so we continue to make strides there, but it's a focus on long-term balancing the community's need and expectation to resource availability and deployment. And then our planning work for what we're about to adopt is a community wildfire protection plan, joint effort between the 2 cities to help provide long-term planning and stability around the risk from wildfire, which if you're watching the weather and the forecast, we expect a busy season, doesn't necessarily mean catastrophic, but can be complex and turn catastrophic overnight. So we continue to watch and prepare for that. Governance, obviously, continues to be a topic of conversation, and our long-term stability really hampering our ability to plan for long-term resource needs. Where do we apply investments? Where do we invest in programs? How do you do that in an equitable way across a large metropolitan region and make sure that both communities are getting the things they need out of the fire department? And as Nathan mentioned, in every scenario where that applies, there's an additional cost that will need to be addressed in the future. Ambulance stability, again, as we talk about workforce, we talk about size, scope, and scale. We are participating in a task force with the county to address long-term stability. Are there areas for different partnerships or different uses of resource? We have the most kind of expansive tiered ambulance system in the state with basic life support, limited duration physicians, single role ambulances, dual role ambulances, and a private contract provider helping us do that in the most economical way possible. We know there's a deficit. We're working on documentation, transport rates, and obviously within the master fee schedule, a rate increase that helps stabilize that system into the future as we have concerns about the long-term stability of the GEMT program that provides supplemental funding from the federal government. So we continue to keep an eye on that going forward. Nathan mentioned fire station planning. That's an important aspect, not just for location and how we serve the city of Springfield, but also limits our ability for force multipliers that we were able to apply in some Eugene stations with new vehicles, a state donated or state granted wildfire asset that allows us to add a vehicle where a traditional fire engine crew can jump onto that and respond to a wildfire in a different way. But we're resource constrained. Our fire stations are old and have limited space. And when you operate ambulances and fire engines, the water truck and additional wildfire apparatus limits our ability to really add those services. And again, long-term planning, as I talked about, communications programs, those types of things, pretty much all of our resources go to service level deployment and limit our ability to expand programs around public information, communication, public education, and other outreach efforts. And again, as I wrap up, wildfire is a big component as we think about the future, as we apply this plan, and we seek for investments on how to address fuels mitigations and public outreach as the public continues to be more concerned about wildfire and its impact. So that is it. And I tied that.
Thank you, Mike. Next, I would like to call up Finance and IT Director Nathan Bell to talk about the Finance Department and IT Department.
Yeah, mine's gonna be pretty brief. I had a full hour platform to really talk about the biggest challenge, which is fiscal stability. But if I was also to just look at the finance department in general, we have seen reductions there for the previous 2 decades and have a pretty lean staff while having kind of growing workload and complexity, and just making sure, there's a lot of things that we do that are driven as, requirements through ORS or have compliance associated with them. And just to make sure that we are able to maintain a certain level of excellence in our work so that we can continue to keep this organization compliant with everything. Looking to our courts, which is in the finance department, I think the biggest challenge we have had over the past years as extended into the future is just the impacts of mental health and drug addiction on public safety, on police, on fire, in our jail and in our courts. And when they get caught up in our public safety cycle, it can be expensive in terms of staff and resources. Knowing that a better way to be addressing that is getting those individuals connected with service providers would be cheaper than having them kind of cycle through our public safety web. The chief mentioned, the jail-based medication program. In our courts, we have now a treatment court. I think we're in our 3rd year of that program. And this is a way for repeat offenders for us to basically kind of wrap around services and work with them to get them sober and back to contributing in society. I think that program is completely grant funded right now. And so, given the current funding environment, just knowing we'll have that ongoing funding for that program. It's a popular program. As you've seen, we don't have the general fund resources to backfill if that funding was to go away, but it's having a positive impact on our community. And then looking to the IT department, technology permeates everything we do, and it is just growing. It's not reflected in our budget. I have 9 FTE in the IT. I'm actually in the process of restructuring again. I'm going to be lowering that down to 7 FTE. And that's coming from the development side, and where we're going to contract with the county that has more staff and a deeper bench in terms of supporting PeopleSoft, which is our enterprise software for both financials and human resources. But what that does is it leaves me with a very lean staffing level. And when every department across the city is lean, every hour of being operating and productive counts. And when IT fails and you're unproductive, that can be a frustrating experience. And so being able to respond to those IT needs across a large organization, and Chief Rush mentioned, leading on technology, other departments are doing the same thing as they make reductions, they're turning to technology, and it's just increasing the workload for us. We're also seeing inflation is exceeding the kind of typical inflation we're seeing, CPI, in both software and hardware. On the software side, we're moving from this ownership model to a annual lease model. Unfortunately, it kind of feels like the annual lease was the same amount as the old days of ownership. So we're seeing that escalation, and we're seeing on the hardware side as well. And then lastly, with IT, I have to mention cybersecurity and really the impact what that could potentially have on that. With the most recent AI tools that are being released, it's a fast changing cybersecurity landscape, and it's going to be a challenge for all organizations. It's getting much more sophisticated. So with that, I'm going to turn it back.
All right, thank you, Nathan. Next, I would like to call up HR Director Chaim Hertz to talk about the Human Resources Department.
Practice. Got my name right. That's in itself is quite a challenge. A little bit, but so thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk today. So my name is Chaim Hertz. I am the Director of Human Resources. My department has the great privilege and joy actually in providing service to all of the departments that have spoke before me. And we have a dedicated team that is passionate about making sure that our employees are cared for. I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the things that keep me up at night. And they're not gonna be specifically around the services that our department provides, but really those things that are outside of our control. So the areas that I'm gonna be focusing on are medical insurance, property liability insurance, planning and talent retention, and lastly, kind of employee development. And I'm gonna try to speed through it within the time that I have. So during Nate's presentation, he referenced that our medical rates have been flat for 13 years. That is not normal. I've been doing HR for 27 years. That is an unheard of model setup. In reality, when we look at our total plan costs, because we do have costs that go up, we have administrative fees and things that go up, but we've been able to control the dollars that go through the insurance chain. So our out-of-pocket expenditures have been what we've been able to control. And in fact, in 2023, our total plan cost was equal, maybe a little bit less than what we had in 2014. Shocking. And we've been able to do that through the utilization of the clinic and a lot of preventative care. But what we're seeing is that may be coming to an end. In the last 2 years, we've seen our out-of-pocket spend increase by 5%, and then last year, 2025, it was 13.5%. If that continues, and if that becomes the new norm, then what we're seeing is roughly a 38% increase in our plan from when we initially set those rates. And what that means in terms of dollars is about $1.9 million or just under $2 million that we would have to increase revenue to cover that through all of the funds. So this is a huge concern, and what is driving it and what makes it difficult is what's driving it is outside of my control. So what we're seeing in the marketplace is fewer healthcare providers, which means less preventative care. It means more people going to urgent care situations and seeing expensive care through urgent needs versus preventative care through either urgent care clinics or emergency rooms. The providers are seeing more underinsured patients, which means raising bad debt. On top of that, we have environmental factors that are impacting us. And this is Chief Caven's area where we're seeing wildfire smoke, extreme heat situations, and then long seasons of chronic conditions. All of those are driving our rate challenges. If that isn't scary enough, then we get into the areas of risk management, which we talk about it, or I think about as really our ability to maintain insurability, which is this give and take on who's going to absorb the most risk. Cybersecurity is one of those areas that is becoming more and more complicated to be able to maintain or to even find somebody who will provide that level of insurance for us. And they're willing to take less risk, which means that we have to bring on more technology and we have to have more training and development to minimize those loopholes that are out there. Secondarily is property and environmental risk. Once again, fire, smoke, heat, storm infrastructures, all of those things are creating environmentals for us on a national level, which impacts our rates. So even though we have a very good experience level, our rates are going up simply because that's what the environment is doing. Workforce planning and development. So we, in general, are a very stable organization. Our turnover this last year was just under 10%, right around 7 or 8% actually, which is comparable to the market. But we've also gone through the Great Recession, which is the post-pandemic period. And so we've been in a massive recruiting period. And when you're in a massive recruiting period, you have high first-year turnover. You've been experiencing that challenge. On top of that, and since the pandemic, we have seen the number of employees with 10 plus years of service in our organization drop from about 60% of our workforce down to 39%. That's a sizable change. And those individuals have advanced institutional knowledge. When I forecast out, 20% of the workforce is eligible to retire today, just simply doing a basic age level. And then within the next 5 years, that 20% becomes 31%. So our challenges of recruiting and retaining and bringing back institutional knowledge is going to continue for some period of time. And so that affects our recruitment, that affects our retention. And then most importantly, when you have inexperienced individuals, your likelihood of workplace injuries and lost productive time increases. And so those are things that we think about as we're working and trying to make sure that we're providing the right service for our employees, which leads us to learning and development. This has been an area of challenge. We've recently brought on software and we've been trying to get better at that, but we have a huge degree of institutional knowledge that we have to work on and figure out ways for individuals to get that. We have to make sure that we have people who can continue to stay in our system, but in reality, especially those people that work out in the field, which is a good chunk of our workplace, their environment is changing. So we have to train for heat and smoke. We have to make sure our supervisors have awareness on environmental health risks. We have to make sure that we're able to have continuity of service, that we minimize our workplace injuries, and that we don't have service failures, because all of that increases liability. And we work really hard to become durable over a really challenging period that happened in and around the pandemic. So in closing, for me, it's healthcare costs, it's insurance costs, it's workforce experience declining, and it's trying to ensure that we have environmental conditions that make individuals want to stay in our organization.
Thank you, Shane. Finally, I would like to call up City Manager Nancy Newton to talk about the City Manager's Office.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask Dottie to join me up here. I'm gonna have him speak a little bit about economic development portion. You know, I think our departments have covered really well some of their individual challenges, and I'm not trying to bum all of you out, but I wanted you to get a really holistic picture of the complexity of the work of a city and just the level of talent and dedication among these department directors is frankly astonishing to me. You know, I know we have some imminent priorities in the city manager's office as far as some policy decisions that need to be made around fire governance, around how we may maintain and forging a path toward greater fiscal sustainability as a city. But I wanted to zoom out a little bit because the thing that I think about is how do I, as a city manager, help support these departments that have to deal with these really gnarly problems and a workforce that is incredibly lean and, you know, really wanting to create a culture where people want to work for the city, are excited about public service and really see that as a calling and we can keep the exceptional customer service that we're so proud of as a city. So those are things that I think about is how do we recruit and retain our employees and make them feel that when they come to work in Springfield, that they will be supported in their work and also as a person. Shane talked a little bit about mitigating risk. I think about that a lot because that directly impacts the bottom line of the city. You know, there's a lot of changes happening in our community. You've probably seen reports in the news about population growth increasing in Oregon and focusing in our regional area and specifically in Springfield. Great news, but also presents additional complexity, as our chief of police mentioned. I also think a lot about overall, what is the economic picture nationally, and of course, you know, throughout. There's a world economy and things that happen around the world impact our costs locally. I mean, we see it in real time, and that's just a fact of how our governance structure works. So that's something that I look at. I also am concerned about emergency preparedness in general. You know, how prepared are our employees if an emergency strikes or a natural disaster or some other form of emergency? You know, the Holiday Farm fire was quite scary for a lot of people. And it displaced many people, some of whom haven't even been able to return to their homes or rebuild. You know, how can we foster an environment of our community being prepared for an emergency? And because there's one thing I know about Springfield is that it's very hands-on community. People will find a way to get things done. And our job is to really help them with the resources and information that they need to kind of lift that kind of can-do spirit that they have. So those are some of the things that I think about. You know, we have some newer counselor members. They're fantastic, but it's a pretty steep learning curve. As you've seen tonight, you have to know a lot about a lot. And so, you know, I really rely on their expertise and and their ability to make decisions as a group and move forward on some pretty complicated policy decisions. So that's always on my radar. I'm gonna turn it over to Neil really quick, to close out.
Thanks, Nancy. Good evening, counselors and budget committee. So I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about economic development as you think 3 and 5 years into the future and how important that is. And as you make recommendations, the expectations that are put on economic development. Tomorrow night, you'll hear from the staff of the Springfield Economic Development Agency. Those are the folks that are doing this economic development work, and it's a city manager staff. So, we're linked. So that's why we're bringing it up this evening. So economic development work is important to the council and the community. It was reinforced by the fiscal task force, but it's something that's been important for years. If you think about the urban renewal districts that the Springfield voters voted for, Glenwood and downtown. If we think about Glenwood, that was 2004. So that urban renewal district's like a 22-year-old now. So really get to the point where we're going to see who that person is. And we've done a lot of work to make that, the best person that we can make. But what happens when you're doing this work is there's a long-term goal of that tax increment that's going to come in. But before it does, you're spending a lot of staff time and money preparing it. So when we look at the Glenwood urban renewal district, the Glenwood Riverfront, we're looking at moving from planning, which we've been in for many years, to actually working on the property, starting to see those roads go in, that infrastructure, and that takes coordination. And so there's a kind of a timing disconnect. The work starts, but before we get into that tax increment, all of this other work is happening that costs money. When we look at downtown, a little bit younger, it's 2007 for an urban renewal district. And we've seen some pretty massive investments in downtown, and we continue to see that. And over the next 3 to 5 years, there's some pretty large investments that we need to get across the finish line. And none of these are promised. You have to do a lot of work, and we have to have great partnerships to make it happen. But again, that's where we're spending time and money up front on this hope that in 3 to 5 years, we're going to start seeing some tax increment come in that we can use elsewhere in the city for the general fund. And then kind of attached to that Glenwood Urban Renewal District. So the north is the riverfront, but south is that Franklin McVeigh corridor. And there's a lot of work that's been happening there over the last few years. Early design work is happening now to make that a really key employment lands area where we want to see development happen. And that's a long-term tax base opportunity. But again, we're doing the work up front, and none of that tax increment is promised to us or coming in yet. So bottom line, economic development is a lot of strategic long-term investments. There is tax money that can come in, but in the meantime, often the general fund is absorbing the staffing, the coordination costs, and any funding gaps. So something to keep in mind as you look 3 to 5 years ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone in department heads for your presentations this evening. The final item on tonight's agenda is business from the audience. Have staff received any requests to speak cards, and are there any members online that have their virtual hands raised?
Thank you, Chair. We have received 9 in-person request to speak cards. And let me just monitor the online attendees to see if any hands go up. There are these in the interim. We have 1 online attendee that has their hand raised.
Okay. Well, based on the number of cards and online attendees with virtual hands raised who wish to speak, we do have about 60 minutes allocated for this agenda item. Typically, we'd be looking at 3 minutes per person max. Okay, so we'll go ahead and proceed with 3 minutes per person. So that'd be 30 minutes. So at this time, when it is time to call up the members of the public, I will call the person up and then announce the person who will be right after, so you'll be ready with your your testimony. So please remember to state your name and ward and limit your comments to 3 minutes, and we'll have a timer on the screen. So I will start with James Lowinger, followed by Eduardo Avalos.
Thank you. James Lowinger, Ward 6. This has been an outstanding meeting. Thank you. And Nathan, that was a great overview. Thank you. The Springfield Library is certainly no great financial burden to the financial operation of the city, and due to hard work and efficiency of staff, operates quite successfully, even though our city budget funding for per capita operating revenue, staff expenditures, and both physical and digital collection expenditures, we measure at the bottom third of Lane County and other nearby libraries. So recognizing our critical historic deficiencies and making a decision to make them worse is a decision with the dire near-term effects. Let's turn to the recently released budget we've been seeing tonight, and I dwelt for a good amount of time at home on page 44, showing the city budget plan department by department. As I studied these figures, a couple of things caused me to stop and consider. First, this is the first time I have noticed that the city has no human services department. I don't mean HR. I mean a department that considers and works in reaching out to the community and helping to solve daily issues in our community. For example, it is a department unlike reactive public safety departments, and instead is proactive in reaching out. The library has become an important de facto human service facility that helps dozens of residents daily on human service needs. The budget will affect that too. Then second, I began to study the department by department preliminary general fund figures, and this occurred to me. The library, the smallest department, became a parable, like the smallest young child in a modest income family with many children. Police and fire, well over 50% of the budget are at the dinner table as reasonably fed parents. And there are reasonably fed youngsters, also a very well-fed favorite child. And then the library, small child sitting alone with only a few crumbs on his plate, hungry and needing to be fed. But the small, young, hungry child was chosen to feel the pain, as was dialogued in the very beginning of the heralded task force that the city wished to impose a payroll tax on the community. It needed to also show pain of a conservatively planned budget. Someone needed to feel the pain. It looks like even before this budget gets approved, you have succeeded in attaining that important goal. The pain, however, stretches beyond just in the library. The pain also affects the Springfield community too. So feel the pain. Thank you. That's a parable.
Thank you, Mr. Lowinger. Next, I'd like to call up Eduardo Avalos, followed by Callie Auckland. Is Eduardo Avalos present?
Let's see if he's out.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to Callie Auckland if they're present, followed by Carol Hart.
Good evening, Budget Committee. My name is Callie Ackland, and I'm a resident of Ward 4. I am an organizer with Safe Springfield Library, which is a local, nonpartisan grassroots group of very passionate library patrons from across Springfield and our rural neighbors who also use our public library. We've been working since last fall to inform the community about the proposed budget cuts and to do everything that we can as a community to try to stop the bleed. Our efforts have been supported by many local unions, organizations, and community leaders, including but not limited to the National Writers Union Oregon Chapter, United Academics of UO, Lane Library League, Springfield Eugene Tenant Association, the League of Women Voters of Lane County, and the Lane County History Museum. I've emailed all of the letters of support to the budget email, and I hope that they've been shared with you all. We all understand that Springfield, like many Oregon cities and school districts, is facing a budget deficit due to the property tax limitations, and tough decisions need to be made about the city's long-term future. Many others have spoken at past council meetings about how the library directly benefits them and their families. And I'm here today to talk about how our public library benefits the town as a whole for generations to come. Research shows that downtown libraries attract people to city centers and are major contributors to neighborhood vitality and downtown activation. We know that our library brings an average of 50 people per open hour to the library and therefore to the downtown area. Library patrons often visit cafes, restaurants, stores, and other venues before or after a visit to the library. As the city prepares to implement a payroll tax on Springfield workers and businesses next year, please consider how closing the library on Mondays will negatively impact the profits of the small mom and pop businesses downtown, businesses that are already struggling with the rising costs of inflation. Research also shows that library reading programs help improve academic achievement of at-risk students. Oregon's reading proficiency is among the worst in the US. Over 70% of Oregon's fourth graders are not proficient at reading. Library access also improves high school graduation rates. Currently, 1 in 5 Springfield School District students don't graduate on time. So cutting the library will harm the children and the future of Springfield. The library ensures that everyone, no matter their income or their background, has the tools they need to learn, to connect, and to thrive. We need our library now more than ever. Please don't cut out the heart to save the body. Thank you.
Next, I would like to call up Carol Hart, followed by CJ Mann.
Hi, I'm Carol Hart. Hope you know me. I am here because of the library. However, I'm going to start with something that doesn't seem like it affects the library. I live in Springfield. I love Springfield. I love everything about it. But I have observed since I've lived here since 2013, that it's really to anyone's benefit in this city if you're white. And I've also noticed that in this city, I have witnessed 2 times, one in 2019, when we had a $10 million lawsuit, which the Springfield community was faced with. And also recently, another $100,000 lawsuit. So that's $10,100,000 that have gone to lawsuits. Okay, how could we have spent that money differently? How might more money be available for this budget that we're working on if we just kept the law and didn't keep getting lawsuits? And there may be another one coming up, which I don't even need to mention. But our library is the one safe place in the city, the one place, safe place that my neighbors, that your neighbors can come to no matter what color they are. And we decide, oh, we don't need the teen program. Let's just cut the library. Well, you know what? That is not only heartbreaking, it's very, very, very short-sighted. And I'm passionate about this because I care about my neighbors. And you have neighbors, I'm sure, that don't feel safe in our city. But if we have this going for us, this white skin, we can damn well feel safe. So that's what I have to say. And I hope you'll reconsider that we get the teen program back. Our kids need it and they deserve it. Thank you. And I'm not mad at anybody. Yeah, I told you before. I gave my Italian up and this is the way it is. I pray for my kids.
You, Carol.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Next, I would like to call up CJ Mann, followed by Teresa Rourke.
Hello, I'm CJ and I live in Ward 4. This is 3 of my 7 library cards. I have a library card for every jurisdiction where I have a grandchild. I believe that's my moral responsibility to help raise my scholars and athletes by making sure they have access to public libraries. I am a frequent flyer to both the Springfield and Eugene libraries because I'm a senior on a very fixed income and I rely on the services the library provides. Historically, communities with higher percentage of income restrictions are frequently those communities who suffer the most from reduced services. The folks and the families that I see there on a regular basis are not only picking up books and movies and CDs and etc., but they go there to have a range of social and community services provided by the library. I noticed that the city has an unrestricted reserved fund. This may be the opportunity to keep the library at current levels by tapping into this fund instead of putting a $310,000 cut on one department and one set of services. Perhaps the council and committee members can take a harder look at ways to balance the budget without putting this cut on struggling families who depend on the library for more than just books, but social services as well. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Mayor Roman?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted you to know Teresa is now online.
Okay.
So if it's okay, we can call her
Okay,
next.
absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go ahead and proceed with Teresa.
Great. Teresa, give me just one moment and I will allow you to speak and you can unmute yourself.
And be followed by Blake Helm after Teresa.
Hi, can you hear me?
Just one moment, Teresa. We will turn our volume up. One moment, please. So please try again.
Can you hear me now?
Can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am Teresa Rourke in Ward 2, and I want to start by thanking everyone for serving on the budget community, as has been made very apparent. You have hard decisions to make. The city of Springfield has hard decisions to make. I am here tonight to speak about the importance of the library. We've heard several people talk about why the library is important to our community, to them, to their experience or people they know. And I think the piece that feels the most impactful to me today, of the many, many reasons to invest and value the community library, is the role in building community trust. Unlike most or almost all city services or government services in general, the library serves everyone, regardless of age, regardless of income. We all can benefit from the library. And part of that, a piece of that, is that the library is an open door. It's a liaison. It's a way that the city of Springfield can build trust with the community. And I think it's especially important right now at this time that that link isn't severed or reduced, much like we heard with the different administrative or support services. I think it's important to see that the library lifts up all of Springfield services by being that trusted place, that trusted part of the government that anyone and everyone can benefit from. So I recognize that you are making a very difficult decision, but just make sure to enter into the calculation that the library impacts across the city, and cuts would have ripple effects, especially given the percentage of the budget represented by the library and those cuts. Those cuts would have particularly deep impacts on the loss of specific services, the entire loss of certain library services that would ripple across the community. So thank you for listening to me this evening, and good luck with your decision process. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Next, I'd like to call up Blake Helm, again followed by George Jesse.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Blake Helm, resident of Ward 4, and I live at 462 35th Street. My comments tonight are largely focused on the library and the essential services that it provides the community. Library services, sadly, are often one of the first to be cut when facing a budget crisis. And I appreciate the difficult task faced by the Financial Stability Task Force to provide recommendations, and for the Budget Committee here and for the City Council to balance the budget, given a wide range of priorities and revenue constraints. However, I am beyond disappointed in the recommendations regarding the library presented by the Fiscal Stability Task Force. As noted by one of our librarians at the last City Council meeting, our library is already staffed below the average in Oregon. Currently, there is 1 staff for every 3 at the typical Oregon library. That's a sizable difference. And in spite of this low service level, the task force recommends cutting the budget by $500,000. Thanks to the city for making that a smaller number. And kudos to the task force for recognizing that budget cuts will result in service cuts. However, a lukewarm at best recommendation for a levy to prevent this shows just how little a priority the library is to them. And I shouldn't be surprised though, as this recommendation comes from a task force almost entirely populated by business interests, if many of whom may not see libraries as an essential service like fire or police, but folks that live and build our community here in Springfield know this to be untrue. The library is every much an essential service on par with police, fire, parks, all services worthy of a levy. Note that cutting services to the library will disproportionately affect the most vulnerable in our community. And I don't know about you, but it was honestly painful to hear from the library director about all the services that will be or could be cut or reduced because of the proposed cuts. And I hope that we all understand that Springfield will be worse off because of these proposed cuts. We will not be better. I assume a lot of folks will mention the revenue constraints. There are, after all, only so many levies, so many taxes and revenue streams available to us, and how this limits what services the city can provide. And as mentioned in this meeting, local tax revenue does not cover services. And I'm not an economic development expert, but I know a couple of things. And in light of all this information, I would challenge folks to look again at the tax incentives that we give away annually to businesses. Providing tax incentives to businesses operating within a development or other overlay zone is a zero-sum game. It's short-sighted, which favors businesses incentivizing decisions they would likely already make, forcing local communities to compete with each other and contributing to reduced revenue.
3 minutes.
And essential service levels. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Blake. Next, I'd like to call up George Jesse, followed by Alexandra Mixer.
My name is George Jesse, I'm from Ward 3, and I'm not here about the library. But I am interested in the street fund. And I've reviewed a number of things within the budget. Expenditures apparently go for traffic systems, engineering, management, street right-of-way management, open spaces, emergency management, operations, training, safety, locating, community events, bicycle facilities, programs,
and finally crack ceiling and potable repair. I guess what I'd like to see or suggest is that maybe realign priorities within that department to spend more emphasis on actually maintaining the surface of the roads. Not so much on planning, on design, on new GIS systems that may or may not be functioning. Some of the existing ones that are on the website don't work now and have actually been taken down. Pothole reporting systems, one specifically. So it's hard to get that information out. I know drivers would like to see more emphasis on maintaining the street surface condition. Some work has been done, but I think by realigning some of those priorities, more of that could be maintained. Same potholes are there day after day, month after month, year after year. We've probably all seen those. With that, the last point I'd like to make, as you're aware, the public's concerned about inflation. Government spending is one of the largest drivers of inflation. We can't pick and choose where our public safety comes from, can't pick and serve where our sewer service comes from, our street maintenance and so forth. So you can't buy those services elsewhere. So I just like to consider that as you deliberate raising taxes, fees, and charges. And that's for the council, since the budget committee members themselves don't get to make those choices. But thank you for your time and thank you for your service.
Thank you, George. Next, I'd like to call up Alexandra Mixer, followed by Jocelyn Matthews.
Hello there. My name is Alexandra Mixer, and I'm here for a couple of reasons. I live in Ward 2 within walking distance of City Hall, hopefully to Van Gordon's dismay. Due to ICE presence in our city, I have just this year started getting into local politics. And I'm honestly appalled by the way this council has talked about us. Like we're just whiny idiots with petty grievances and not concerned locals with our own desires that may just oppose your own. Which should tell you something, but what do I know, right? I'm just a dum-dum who likes it when kids can read. My mom has been a nurse for almost 25 years, has saved countless lives, cares for our elderly in their last days, and she makes a little over $80,000 a year without overtime. I'm honestly not sure what any of you do that's more important than that, so perhaps it's time to look inward for budget cuts instead of wringing out services like our library that is equally as important for our community as our healthcare workers. I know you weren't listening when the list was given before, but I know I can be a lot louder. Access to thousands of books, movies, video games for all ages. The only free literacy program in our town for early literacy. Seems important. Quiet study spaces for students. Free weekly tech help for seniors. Free internet and computer access. Affordable copy and printing services, free access to local newspapers, opportunities for social and professional networking, free meeting space for community groups and activities, family passes to local museums and entertainment centers, resources to services addressing issues like housing and addiction, a sense of belonging, and much more. And despite all that, the Springfield Public Library is the lowest funded library in its town size in Oregon. My son is turning 13 this year. Would have been nice if there was a teen program available for him, but I guess fancy blowouts are more important. That being said, I'd like to call for the firing of Nancy Newton and for her to be replaced. Being the city manager, not only did she take a pay increase for her to make a whole $22,000, heck of a lot of dough to receive for ruining the lives of the poor and marginalized. But before budget discussions were even set to start, 2 positions were quietly closed and 1 librarian fired at our local library. Van Gordon even told us at the March 31st City Council meeting that it's not what I want to do, but has made no move to remedy the situation or reprimand Miss Nan for her seemingly unilateral decisions. Unless he actually doesn't care, who knows? She then sits there desperate to not make eye contact with us and hoping that hiding behind her hair means that if she cannot see us, we cannot see her. We see you, Nan. We've seen what you've done. We've seen how you've acted towards us, the people you actually work for, and we've seen your utter lack of remorse for taking services from the meeting.
Alexandra, thank you.
3 minutes.
Time's up.
And honestly, I'm sick of
Alexandra,
seeing the
thank you.
people's tax dollars going for her gussing herself up when even Brian.
Alexandra,
wanted to
thank
end up
you.
looking like
Please,
it
please.
disgusts me on a psychological level, and I'd like you to please, for everyone's sake, resign with dignity, but you don't even know the definition of the word.
Alexandra, enough, thank you.
Like to next call up Jocelyn Matthews.
My name is Jocelyn Matthews. I live in Ward 6 near Main and 69th. I am a part-time employee of Springfield Public Library, but I comment tonight on behalf of myself personally. I have only been an employee for a small time, but I have been a steady patron of the library for over 10 years. When I moved to Springfield with my husband and 4 kids, one of the first things that we did was get library cards before we even unpacked the moving boxes. By that time, I had already learned how valuable a library can be. These days, we can easily be referred to as regulars when it comes to the library. Some of the librarians have lovingly called my family library super users. I'm not exaggerating when I say we have checked out thousands of books from this library. There have been times when we have gone to the library every week, sometimes even multiple times a week. At any given time, you can find a variety of library books at our house. But it's not just about the books. When we first arrived in Springfield, my kids were between the ages of 10 and 1.5 years old. Over the years, we have attended lap-sit story times, preschool story times, middle grade book clubs, teen program events, and many other special programming events. We have seen jugglers, magicians, unicyclists, exotic creatures and birds, learned about different cultures, all because of Springfield Public Library. The library helped me to get to know this community and what it had to offer. My oldest was very involved in the teen program. She became a teen advisory board member so she could help plan activities and volunteer her time. She was able to use that experience and list the teen librarian Cara Kinsey as a reference when she applied for her first job. Unfortunately now, my youngest daughter, after years of watching her older siblings go to teen program events, is almost old enough to participate in teen activities, but because of cuts that have already happened, nothing will be offered. When we have come downtown to visit the library, we have discovered other fun places to visit because the library brought us here. Now it's hard to come to the library without my kids craving any of our favorite places to eat downtown. Many of those businesses would not have seen us if it weren't for the library. Before Springfield, we lived in a small suburb in Illinois. Our nearest library was tiny, had a limited book collection, and very little programming. I regularly drove my family to the next town over where they had more books, more activities, and generally much more to offer. As a consequence, I did more shopping and eating out in the next town over. Investing in your library is a way to invest in local businesses. My family and I love the Springfield Public Library. It is our happy place. We have learned and made memories at the library. Please continue to fund the library. If anything, increase its funding. I want other families and community members to be able to have the same access to experiences and learning and reading that my family has enjoyed over the years. I want our community to be connected through the library. I want our community to be educated by one of the last institutions of our society that remains free to all. We can't take it for granted. We have to sustain libraries for future generations.
Thank you, Jocelyn. This time, are there any more?
There are no more virtual hands. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you to all who gave public testimony. All of this and input, and those that were emailed in will be taken into consideration in the things that we hear over the next 2 evenings. At this time, there's no other business on the agenda for this evening, so I will adjourn the Springfield Budget Committee for this evening, and our next meeting will be held tomorrow, Tuesday, May 5th, immediately following the CETA Budget Committee meeting, which begins at 5:30.